The icy mountain water crashed against Catherine Zeiss's body as she clung desperately to the slippery rock, her knuckles white with effort and her strength fading with each passing second. Colorado Territory, 1875, a place where nature showed no mercy and death often came without warning. "Hold on," a deep voice shouted over the roaring rapids. Through the spray of water, Catherine glimpsed a tall figure on horseback at the riverbank, swinging a lasso above his head with practiced precision. The journey west had been Catherine's dream, not this nightmare of raging water and certain death. As her fingers began to slip, the rope sailed through the air, landing perfectly around her torso. With one final surge of desperation, she grabbed the lifeline just as the current tore her from the rock. The powerful pull of the rapids fought against the cowboy's strength as he wrapped the rope around his saddle horn and backed his horse away from the water's edge. Catherine felt herself being dragged through the churning water toward the shore, gasping and sputtering as waves crashed over her head. When her body finally touched the rocky riverbank, strong hands pulled her the rest of the way. Catherine collapsed onto the ground, coughing up water and trembling from cold and fear. "Easy now," said the same deep voice she'd heard before. "You're safe." Catherine looked up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face partially hidden by a dark beard. The cowboy knelt beside her, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "I'm Colton Reed," he said, draping his duster around her shivering shoulders. "And you're mighty lucky to be alive, miss." "Catherine Zeiss," she managed between chattering teeth. "And I owe you my life, Mr. Reed." Neither could have known in that moment how their paths would intertwine, or how a chance rescue on the banks of the Colorado River would change everything for them both. Catherine had never imagined finding herself in such peril. Just 3 weeks prior, she'd been safely ensconced in her father's Boston home, surrounded by books and the comforts of high society. But that life had become unbearable after her father announced her engagement to Harold Winthrop, a business associate 30 years her senior with cold eyes and wandering hands. When her childhood friend Nancy wrote from Jamestown, California, describing the beauty of the frontier and opportunities for women to forge their own paths, Catherine made the boldest decision of her 22 years. She packed her most practical belongings, withdrew her modest inheritance from her late mother, and boarded a train west before her father could stop her. The journey had been arduous, and upon reaching Colorado Territory, she'd hired a guide to take her through the mountain passes. But the man had proven untrustworthy, attempting to steal her money while she slept at their campsite near the river. In the ensuing struggle, she'd fallen into the rapids, certain she would die until this cowboy appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. Colton helped Catherine to her feet, steadying her as she swayed with exhaustion. "My camp's not far," he said. "Can you walk a bit? You need to get warm and dry." Catherine nodded, clutching his duster around her shoulders. As they walked toward his horse, her legs gave out. Without hesitation, Colton scooped her into his arms. "I've got you, Miss Zeiss," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He set her atop his chestnut gelding, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was strangely comforting as they rode toward a small clearing where a campfire still glowed. Catherine fought to stay conscious, the day's ordeal taking its toll. "Stay with me now," Colton said near her ear. "Just a little farther." At his campsite, Colton eased her down from the horse and guided her to sit by the fire. He rummaged through his saddlebags, producing a flannel shirt and woolen trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're dry," he explained, handing them to her. "I'll turn my back while you change. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Catherine hesitated, her Boston propriety warring with practicality. "Thank you," she finally managed, taking the clothes with trembling hands. True to his word, Colton turned away, busying himself with tending to his horse while she struggled out of her sodden dress and undergarments. The simple act of changing nearly depleted what little strength she had left, but the dry clothes were a blessing against her chilled skin. "I'm decent," she called weakly when finished. Colton returned to the fire, nodding with approval at seeing some color returning to her cheeks. He added wood to the flames, then prepared a tin cup of coffee from the pot nestled in the coals. "Drink this," he said, pressing the warm cup into her hands. "It'll help." Catherine sipped the strong, bitter liquid, grimacing slightly but grateful for its warmth. As the heat spread through her body, her mind cleared enough to properly regard her rescuer. Colton Reed was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, muscular build of a man who lived his life outdoors. His dark hair curled slightly where it met the collar of his shirt, and despite the beard, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps late 20s. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his movements efficient and purposeful as he prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "May I ask what you were doing in the river?" he questioned, keeping his tone conversational. Catherine sighed, setting down her cup. "My guide turned out to be a thief. He tried to rob me while I slept. I fought him off, but in the struggle I fell into the water." She shuddered at the memory. "The current was so strong, I barely managed to grab that rock." Colton's expression darkened. "This guide, what did he look like?" "Tall, thin, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, called himself Johnson." "Hank Johnson," Colton spat. "He's known in these parts, pretends to guide travelers but robs them instead, sometimes worse." He studied her face. "You're lucky you escaped with your life, Miss Zeiss." "Please call me Catherine," she said. "After saving my life, formality seems unnecessary." A small smile touched his lips. "Catherine, then, and I'm Colton." He handed her a tin plate of food, and despite her exhaustion, Catherine found herself ravenous. They ate in comfortable silence as night settled fully around them, the stars emerging in brilliant clarity above the Colorado wilderness. "Where were you headed?" Colton asked eventually. "Jamestown, California," Catherine replied. "My friend Nancy lives there. She's opened a small school and invited me to join her." Colton nodded thoughtfully. "That's quite a journey for a woman alone." "I had little choice," Catherine said, a hint of defiance in her voice. "My father arranged a marriage I couldn't accept. I decided I'd rather face the wilderness than that particular fate." Something like respect flickered in Colton's eyes. "I'm headed to California myself, driving a small herd to a ranch outside Sacramento. It's not far from Jamestown." Hope flared in Catherine's chest. "Might I? That is, would you consider allowing me to travel with you? I can cook and tend to camp chores. I won't be a burden." Colton studied her for a long moment. "The trail's dangerous, especially for a city woman." "I've already survived a treacherous guide and raging rapids," Catherine pointed out. "And I'm a quick learner." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That you are," he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll head to my herd in the morning. My trail hands might raise their eyebrows, but they know better than to question me." Relief washed over Catherine. "Thank you. I promise I won't slow you down." As they settled in for the night, Catherine on a bedroll near the fire and Colton a respectful distance away, she found herself studying her rescuer's profile against the starlit sky. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an unassuming confidence that made her feel safe for the first time since leaving Boston. "Colton," she said softly. He responded, turning his head toward her. "Thank you, not just for the rescue, but for believing me." He was quiet for a moment. "Get some rest, Catherine. We've got a long ride tomorrow." As sleep claimed her, Catherine couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had placed Colton Reed on that riverbank at precisely the moment she needed him most. Morning came with a brilliant sunrise that painted the mountains in gold and rose. Catherine awoke disoriented, her body aching from the previous day's ordeal. For a moment, panic seized her as unfamiliar surroundings registered, but then the memory of Colton's rescue returned. She sat up to find him already awake, tending to the fire and preparing coffee. He'd given her privacy to sleep while maintaining a watchful eye on their surroundings. "Morning," he said, nodding toward her. "How are you feeling?" Catherine stretched cautiously, taking inventory of her bruised body. "Sore, but alive thanks to you." He acknowledged her gratitude with a simple nod. "Hungry?" She accepted the plate of cornbread and jerky he offered, watching as he moved efficiently around the camp, packing their few belongings. "My herd's about half a day's ride from here," he explained. "I was scouting ahead when I heard you. 3 men are watching the cattle, good men I've worked with for years." "Have you been a cowboy long?" Catherine asked, curious about this man who'd saved her life. Colton paused, seeming to weigh his response. "Since I was 16. Started as a ranch hand in Texas, worked my way up to trail boss by 22. He secured a bedroll to his saddle. "This is my 3rd drive to California." "You must have seen much of the country," Catherine observed. "More than most," he agreed. "Though I reckon you've seen parts I haven't, coming from Boston," Catherine smiled. "Different worlds entirely. Boston has its charms, but it feels confining. Everything predetermined by family name and social standing." "And out here?" Colton asked, genuinely curious. "Out here, the air itself feels different." Catherine gestured to the vast landscape around them. "Like anything is possible." Something in Colton's expression softened. "It is and it isn't. Nature makes her own rules, and they're often harsher than society's. But there's truth in what you say, a person can remake themselves out here, if they've got the courage." After breaking camp, Colton helped Catherine onto his horse. With her own belongings lost to the river, she had only what she wore and the few items that had been in the pockets of her dress: a locket containing her mother's portrait, a small purse of coins she'd kept on her person, and a folded letter from Nancy. They rode double, Catherine seated before Colton, his arms around her to handle the reins. The intimacy of the arrangement would have scandalized Boston society, but Catherine found herself oddly comfortable in his steady presence. As they traveled through breathtaking mountain passes and verdant valleys, Catherine learned more about her rescuer. Colton had been born in Virginia but left home young after his parents died of fever. He'd made his own way in the world since then, working cattle drives and occasionally serving as a scout for the army. He was 31, unmarried and seemingly content with his solitary existence. "What about family?" Catherine asked as they paused to rest the horse by a clear stream. "No one waiting for you somewhere?" Colton shook his head, watching the water flow. "No one. Had a brother once, but he died at Shiloh." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly, recognizing the pain that still lingered in his voice, though the war had ended a decade ago. "Long time passed," he replied, but his eyes said otherwise. By midday, they crested a ridge that revealed a small herd of cattle grazing in a lush valley below. 3 riders moved among the animals, keeping them grouped together. "There they are," Colton said. 40 head of prime beef cattle, bound for the Donovan Ranch near Sacramento. They descended into the valley, and the cowboys spotted them, riding over with curious expressions that turned to surprise when they saw Catherine. "Boss," called the oldest of the 3, a weathered man with a silver-streaked beard, "was starting to wonder if you'd fallen off a cliff." "Nearly did," Colton replied good-naturedly. found something more interesting instead. He introduced Catherine, explaining briefly how they'd met. The men Tom Wallace, Jed Cooper, and Miguel Hernandez greeted her with respectful nods, though Catherine caught the questioning glances they exchanged. Clearly, a woman joining their drive was unprecedented. "Miss Zeiss will be traveling with us to California," Colton stated in a tone that invited no argument. "She's headed to Jamestown." "Pleased to have you, miss," Tom said, tipping his hat. The others echoed the sentiment, and Catherine felt a wave of relief. These men followed Colton's lead without question, a testament to the respect he commanded. That evening, around the campfire, Catherine observed the easy camaraderie among the cowboys. Miguel played softly on a harmonica while Jed, the youngest at perhaps 25, told animated stories of previous drives. Tom mostly listened, occasionally correcting exaggerations with dry humor. Colton sat slightly apart, keeping a watchful eye on both the camp and the cattle. Catherine approached him, offering a cup of coffee she'd prepared. "Your men seem like a good crew," she remarked, settling beside him. "The best," Colton agreed. "Tom's been riding with me for 7 years. Saved my life once when we got caught in a flash flood in Arizona. Miguel's the finest horseman I've ever seen, and Jed may talk too much, but he works twice as hard as he talks." "They respect you," Catherine observed. Colton shrugged slightly. "We've been through hard times together. That builds something stronger than respect." "Trust," Catherine supplied. He nodded, meeting her eyes. Not easily given out here, but once earned, not easily broken. Over the following days, they made steady progress westward. Catherine insisted on pulling her weight, rising early to help prepare breakfast and taking over many of the camp chores. She learned to ride one of the spare horses, a gentle bay mare named Penny, and gradually adjusted to the rhythm of life on the trail. The cowboys, initially reserved around her, gradually accepted her presence. Miguel taught her Spanish phrases, while Jed regaled her with tales of frontier life that made her laugh despite their obvious embellishment. Tom, more circumspect, nevertheless showed her kindness in small ways, ensuring she had the most comfortable spot by the fire, or slipping extra coffee into her cup on cold mornings. And then there was Colton. He maintained a certain distance, professional and courteous, but Catherine often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. One evening, a week into their journey, they made camp near a stand of aspens whose leaves shimmered gold in the setting sun. After dinner, while the others played cards, Catherine wandered to the edge of the trees, seeking a moment of solitude. Colton approached quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Everything all right?" Catherine nodded, "just admiring the view. It's beautiful here." He followed her gaze to where the mountains rose against the twilight sky. "Gets under your skin, doesn't it? This country." "It does," she agreed. "I thought I knew what beauty was, but Boston's gardens and architecture pale in comparison." "Different kinds of beauty," Colton suggested. "One made by man, one by something greater." Catherine studied him, intrigued by this glimpse of a more philosophical side. "You're not what I expected, Colton Reed." His eyebrow raised slightly. "What did you expect from a cowboy?" "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted with a small smile, "but not someone who contemplates the nature of beauty." "A man can punch cows and still have thoughts," he replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Catherine laughed, the sound carrying through the quiet evening. "Forgive me, I didn't mean to suggest otherwise." His expression softened. "Nothing to forgive." They stood in comfortable silence until the first stars appeared overhead. "May I ask you something?" Catherine ventured. You can ask, might not answer. Why were you alone that day? By the river? Colton was quiet so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Sometimes the trail gets too crowded, even with just 3 other men. I need space to think, to be on my own for a spell. And what do you think about when you're alone? He met her gaze directly. The past, choices made, roads not taken, regrets. She asked softly. Some, he acknowledged, but not as many as I might have. Thank you, Catherine said, for answering, for being honest. Honesty's easier than lies out here, Colton replied. Lies catch up to a person faster when there's nowhere to hide. As they walked back to camp together, Catherine felt something shift between them, a tentative trust beginning to form, fragile as the first shoots of spring, but just as determined to grow. The next day brought their first real challenge. As they forded a river, one of the cattle panicked in the swift current, setting off a chain reaction that scattered the herd. For hours, the cowboys worked to regain control, riding hard to prevent a full-scale stampede. Catherine, initially told to stay safely on the bank, couldn't remain idle. Mounting Penny, she helped guide straying animals back toward the main group, recalling what she'd observed over the past days. When the herd was finally settled, Colton rode to her side, his expression a mixture of concern and grudging admiration. That was reckless, he said, but without real anger. You could have been trampled. You were short-handed, Catherine replied simply. I saw how to help. You did, he conceded. Where did a Boston lady learn to read cattle movement like that? I've been watching, all of you, learning. She smoothed Penny's mane. I may be from the city, but I'm not blind or stupid. A rare, full smile broke across Colton's face. No, Miss Catherine Zeiss, you are neither of those things. That night, Catherine joined the men around the fire with a new level of acceptance. Tom passed her the whiskey flask after dinner, a gesture of inclusion that spoke volumes. You did good today, he said gruffly. Most city folk would have frozen or run. Miss Catherine's not most folk, Jed chimed in. She's got sand. Miguel nodded his agreement, raising his cup in a silent toast. Catherine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or whiskey. For the first time in her life, she was being valued for her actions rather than her family name or social graces. Later, as the others bedded down, Colton motioned for her to join him for a final cup of coffee. Thank you, he said quietly, for helping today. It made a difference. I'm glad, Catherine replied. I don't want to be just another burden for you to carry to California. Colton's eyes held hers. You're not a burden, Catherine, not even close. The way he said her name with a softness she hadn't heard before sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She looked away, suddenly aware of how closely they sat, how the firelight played across his features, softening them. I should get some sleep, she said, rising perhaps too quickly. Catherine, he called softly as she turned away. When she looked back, he simply said, You belong out here more than you know. She carried those words with her into sleep, finding unexpected comfort in them. As days turned into weeks, the landscape gradually changed around them. They left the high country behind, descending into rolling foothills that would eventually give way to California's Central Valley. The weather grew warmer, the vegetation more varied, and Catherine found herself settling into trail life with surprising ease. She no longer feared the vast open spaces but drew strength from them. Her skin bronzed under the sun, her hands toughened from work, and she learned to read the land as the cowboys did, noting signs of water, weather changes, potential danger. One morning as they broke camp, Jed rode in from his dawn patrol with news that changed their plans. Riders coming from the south, he reported. 6, maybe 7 men moving fast. Colton's expression darkened. Raiders, maybe, or worse. He turned to Catherine. "We need to move the herd quickly. There's a box canyon about 3 miles ahead where we can defend them if needed." The tension in camp was immediate as everyone sprang into action. Catherine helped pack the camp gear while the men got the cattle moving at a faster pace than usual. They reached the canyon entrance by mid-morning, driving the cattle deep into its protective walls. Colton positioned Tom and Miguel with the herd while he, Jed, and Catherine waited near the entrance, rifles ready. The riders appeared on the horizon within the hour. 7 men, as Jed had guessed, moving with purpose toward their position. Catherine felt her heart racing but kept her hands steady on the rifle Colton had given her weeks ago and taught her to use. "Steady," Colton murmured. "Let's see what they want before assuming trouble." As the riders drew closer, however, Catherine gasped in recognition. "The one in front, that's Johnson, the guide who tried to rob me." Colton's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving forward to meet the approaching men. The riders slowed as they approached, Johnson in the lead with a malicious smile spreading across his face when he spotted Catherine. "Well, look what we have here," he called. "The Boston lady survived her swim and found herself some protection." His gaze slid to Colton. "Raid. Should have known you'd pick up strays." "You're trespassing, Johnson," Colton replied evenly, though Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders. "Free country," Johnson shrugged. "Just passing through, though that lady owes me for services rendered. I guided her 3 days before she tried to cheat me." "That's a lie." Catherine stepped forward despite Colton's warning. "You tried to rob me while I slept." Johnson's companions laughed unpleasantly. "Hear that, boys? The lady's calling me a liar." His hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. "I don't take kindly to that kind of talk. And I don't take kindly to men threatening women in my camp," Colton said, his voice dangerously calm. "Ride on, Johnson. Whatever grievance you think you have isn't worth dying over." Johnson's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Colton's steady stance, Jed's rifle trained on them from behind a boulder, and the likelihood that more men waited in the canyon. "We're 7 to your what for?" Johnson sneered, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "4 who know how to shoot," Colton corrected. "And you'd be the first to fall. Is that how you want to die, Johnson, over a failed robbery?" A tense silence followed as Johnson weighed his options. Finally, he spat on the ground. "Keep the bitch. She wasn't worth much anyway." He jerked his head at his companions. "Let's go, boys. Plenty other pickings out here." They watched as the riders departed, maintaining their guard until the men were specks on the horizon. "You think they'll be back?" Jed asked, lowering his rifle. "Not if they're smart," Colton replied. "But we'll keep watches tonight just in case." Catherine's hands trembled now that the danger had passed. "I'm sorry. He was after me, not your cattle." Colton turned to her, his expression softening. "Don't apologize. Men like Johnson find reasons for trouble. If it wasn't you, it would have been something else." That night, they kept the herd in the canyon's protection. Catherine found sleep elusive, starting at every sound beyond the campfire's light. Eventually, she gave up trying and joined Colton where he sat on watch, rifle across his knees. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if Johnson had found me alone." "But he didn't," Colton reminded her. "And now he knows you're not alone." "Because of you," Catherine said. "You've saved me twice now." Colton was silent for a moment. "Maybe it's not about saving. Maybe it's just people helping each other survive out here." He looked at her directly. "You'd do the same for any of us." The confidence in his voice, his certainty in her character touched Catherine deeply. "Yes," she agreed. "I would." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead until Catherine's eyelids grew heavy despite her anxiety. Without thinking, she leaned against Colton's shoulder, drawn to his warmth and steadiness. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Instead, he shifted slightly to make her more comfortable, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture that felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Sleep," he murmured. "I've got watch." Catherine drifted off, feeling safer than she had any right to in the wild country with danger lurking. In Colton's presence, fear receded like shadows before dawn. She woke at first light, still nestled against his side, momentarily confused until memory returned. Embarrassment flooded her as she pulled away. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. Nothing to apologize for," Colton interrupted gently. "Sometimes comfort's needed, nothing wrong in that." His matter-of-fact tone eased her discomfort. But as Catherine moved away to help with breakfast preparations, she couldn't ignore the lingering warmth where his arm had been, or the way her heart had quickened when she woke to find herself so close to him. They left the canyon that morning, resuming their westward journey with increased vigilance. The incident with Johnson had shaken everyone, but it also strengthened the bonds between them. Catherine noticed the cowboys were more protective of her now, arranging themselves so that one was always nearby as they traveled. 3 days later, they crossed into California, the landscape changing yet again as they descended toward the Sacramento Valley. The Sierra Nevada mountains rose to the east, their peaks still capped with snow despite the advancing summer. "Almost there," Colton told Catherine as they paused to water the horses at a clear stream. "Another week, maybe less, and we'll reach the Donovan Ranch." Jamestown's about a day's ride south from there. Catherine nodded, surprised to find herself feeling conflicted rather than relieved. The prospect of reaching their destination of parting ways with Colton and the others brought an unexpected sadness. "What will you do after delivering the cattle?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Colton shrugged, squinting toward the distant mountains. "Depends on what Donovan offers. Might stay on for the summer, help with the roundup. Might head back east for another herd." "You don't have a place of your own," Catherine ventured. "Not yet," he replied, and something in his voice suggested it was a long-held dream rather than a passing thought. "Someday, maybe." Before Catherine could respond, Miguel rode up with news that shifted their focus back to the journey. "Creek ahead is running high from the mountain snowmelt. We'll need to find another crossing." The remainder of the day was spent scouting a safe passage, eventually finding a shallow ford several miles north of their planned route. The detour cost them time, and they made camp earlier than usual, the cattle too exhausted to push further. That evening, as Catherine helped prepare dinner, Tom approached her with an unusual request. "It's my wife's birthday," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "Back in Texas. I was wondering if you might. That is, I can't write so good, and I thought maybe." "You'd like me to write a letter for you," Catherine offered, touched by the request. Relief washed over Tom's weathered face. "If you wouldn't mind. Got paper and pencil in my saddlebag." After dinner, Catherine sat with Tom a little apart from the others, helping him compose a tender message to the woman who'd waited faithfully through years of his long absences. His words, rough but heartfelt, spoke of enduring love and the promise of reunion. "Tell her I'm coming home after this drive," Tom instructed. "For good this time. Got enough saved now for that piece of land we've been eyeing." Catherine wrote his words faithfully, touched by this glimpse into a life so different from her own yet grounded in the same human needs: love, home, connection. When they finished, Tom folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Much obliged, Miss Catherine. Mary'll be pleased to get this. Been married 27 years come August." "She's a fortunate woman," Catherine said sincerely. Tom shook his head. "I'm the fortunate one. Not many women would put up with a wandering cowboy for so long. He glanced toward where Colton sat cleaning his rifle. The trail's a lonely life. Takes a special kind of woman to understand it. With that, he returned to the fire, leaving Catherine to wonder if his words contained a message meant specifically for her. Later, she found Colton still sitting apart, his expression distant as he gazed toward the mountains. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him. A faint smile touched his lips. "Not worth that much." "I'll be the judge," Catherine replied, drawing her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. Colton was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about endings, how this trail drive is almost over, how things change." "Are you sad to see it end?" she asked. "Not the drive itself," he admitted. "But there's something about being on the trail, a simplicity. Everything reduced to what needs doing today. No past weighing on you, no future to worry over. Just the present moment," Catherine murmured. "Exactly." He glanced at her. "Most people spend their lives rushing towards something or running from something. Few know how to just be." "And you do?" she questioned gently. His smile turned rueful. "Not always, but out here sometimes I come close." Catherine considered his words. "I think I understand that better now than I would have a month ago. Before the river, before you found me, I was running from my father, from a future I didn't want. Now, he prompted when she trailed off. "Now I'm not sure if I'm running from or toward something," she admitted. "But it feels different, like I'm choosing rather than just reacting." Colton nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's no small thing." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, memories of places they'd seen, stories from their different worlds. Catherine described Boston's cobblestone streets and harbor views, while Colton spoke of Texas thunderstorms and New Mexico deserts. As the fire died down, and the others sought their bedrolls, neither seemed eager to end their conversation. Stars emerged overhead in breathtaking profusion, and a comfortable silence fell between them. "I've never seen so many stars," Catherine said finally, her voice hushed with wonder. "City lights dim them," Colton replied. "Out here nothing gets between you and the sky." On impulse, Catherine reached for his hand, finding it in the darkness. "Thank you," she said simply. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me, not the Boston society lady or the helpless woman in the river, just me." Colton was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. "Easiest thing I've ever done," he finally said, his voice low. "Seeing you." The air between them seemed to change, charged with possibility and unspoken feelings. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest as Colton turned toward her, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Catherine," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, scarcely breathing. The moment hung suspended, fragile as morning dew. Then from the herd, a cow bellowed in distress, shattering the spell. Colton's hand fell away as he rose quickly to his feet. "Something's wrong," he said, reaching for his rifle. The peaceful night erupted into chaos as the cattle began to stir nervously. Miguel appeared from his watch position, his voice urgent. "Mountain lion." Near the creek, the men sprang into action, Catherine grabbing her own rifle and following. In the darkness, she could make out the shape of a large cat slinking along the periphery of the herd, sending the cattle into a panic. "Hold them," Colton shouted to Jed and Tom, who were already working to keep the frightened animals from stampeding. Catherine moved to help, remembering what she'd learned about keeping cattle calm. She positioned herself at the edge of the herd opposite the predator, singing softly an old lullaby her mother had taught her while maintaining a steady presence that gave the animals something to focus on besides their fear. Meanwhile, Colton and Miguel circled toward the mountain lion, hoping to drive it away without having to shoot. Predators were a natural part of the wilderness, and Colton preferred not to kill unnecessarily. Their strategy worked. Faced with human opposition, the big cat retreated into the darkness, though not before claiming one calf that had strayed too far from the herd. By the time order was restored, dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. The cowboys, exhausted but relieved to have prevented a full stampede, gathered around the rekindled fire for coffee. "Quick thinking with that singing, Miss Catherine," Tom commented. "Never seen cattle settle so fast during a cat scare." "My mother used to say music soothes all creatures," Catherine replied, accepting a steaming cup from Miguel. "I didn't know if it would work, but it seemed worth trying." "It worked," Colton confirmed, joining them. His eyes met hers briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the moment interrupted, perhaps, or something deeper neither was ready to name. They broke camp later than usual, the entire party moving more slowly after the night's disruption. The landscape grew increasingly verdant as they continued westward, the Sierra foothills giving way to oak-studded grasslands ideal for grazing. "Tomorrow we'll reach Sullivan's Creek," Colton informed them as they made camp that evening. "Last water before Donovan's ranch. Should be at the ranch by sundown the day after." The announcement brought mixed reaction satisfaction from the cowboys at a job nearly complete, and a hollow feeling in Catherine's chest at the thought of journey's end. In just 2 days, she would continue to Jamestown alone, leaving behind the makeshift family she'd found on the trail. That night, Catherine found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others, and walked a short distance from camp. Finding a fallen log, she sat to contemplate the star-filled sky and the shadowy landscape around her. She didn't hear Colton approach until he spoke. "Couldn't sleep," Catherine started slightly, then smiled as he sat beside her. "Too much on my mind, I suppose. The future," he guessed. "Among other things." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what happens after we reach Donovan's ranch, about saying goodbye." Colton was silent for a long moment. "It doesn't have to be goodbye," he finally said, his voice careful, measured. Catherine turned to face him, trying to read his expression in the moonlight. "What do you mean?" He seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for a man typically so direct. "I could escort you to Jamestown, make sure you arrive safely." "You would do that?" Catherine asked, her heart quickening. "I would," he confirmed, "if you wanted." The air between them felt charged again as it had the night before. This time there was no mountain lion to interrupt as Colton slowly reached for her hand. "Catherine," he began, then paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "These weeks on the trail, they've been different because of you." "Different how?" she prompted gently when he hesitated. His fingers tightened around hers. "I've spent most of my life alone, by choice mostly. Never met anyone who made me question that choice." His eyes, earnest and uncertain, met hers. "Until you," Catherine's breath caught. "Colton." "I'm not good with words," he continued. "Not like this. But I need you to know before we reach Donovan's, before our paths might part, that you've become important to me. More than important." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his usually guarded expression, moved Catherine deeply. Acting on instinct rather than thought, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Colton remained still, as if shocked by her boldness. Then his arms came around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with unexpected tenderness. Catherine felt something unfurl within her, a joy so pure and overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. When they finally parted, Colton's forehead rested against hers, his breath warm on her skin. "I've been wanting to do that since Sullivan Pass," he admitted ruefully. Catherine laughed softly. Why didn't you? Didn't think a lady like you would want a rough cowboy like me, he replied, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. Then you don't know me as well as I thought, Catherine murmured, her hand coming up to cover his. Because I've been wanting the same thing. They stayed there beneath the stars, talking as they never had before about dreams and fears, about the futures they'd imagined, and the unexpected present they now shared. Colton spoke of his hope to someday have land of his own, a small ranch where he could put down roots after years of wandering. Catherine described her ambitions beyond society marriage to teach, to write, to make a meaningful difference. We're not so different, Colton observed as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, both looking for something authentic in a world that tries to put people in neat little boxes. Perhaps that's why we found each other, Catherine suggested. Two people refusing their assigned boxes, meeting in the wide open spaces between. Colton smiled, a full, unguarded expression that transformed his face. I like that thought. They returned to camp as the others began to stir, their newfound connection a warm secret between them. If the cowboys noticed the change the way Colton's eyes sought Catherine's, or how she smiled more freely, they kept their observations to themselves. The day passed in a golden haze for Catherine. Even the grueling work of driving cattle seemed lighter, infused with a joy she couldn't contain. By evening they reached Sullivan's Creek, making camp beneath towering cottonwoods whose leaves whispered in the gentle breeze. After dinner, Tom produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for journey's end. Seems fitting to celebrate a little early, he announced, passing the bottle around. To a successful drive and to Miss Catherine, who's proved tougher than half the cowboys I've ridden with. Hear, hear, Jed seconded, raising his cup. Miguel, usually quiet, added, and to new beginnings. His knowing glance between Catherine and Colton suggested the cowboys weren't as oblivious as they'd seemed. Catherine felt her cheeks warm but raised her cup nevertheless, touched by their acceptance. Later, as the celebration wound down, Colton drew Catherine aside. I need to check the herd one last time, he said. Walk with me. They strolled along the creek bank, the night air sweet with wildflowers and the sound of running water. When they reached a small clearing where moonlight silvered the grass, Colton stopped. I've been thinking, he began, taking both her hands in his. About tomorrow. About Jamestown and what comes after. Catherine's heart quickened. And I'm wondering if you'd consider a different path, he said carefully. The Donovan Ranch borders a piece of unclaimed land, good water, good grazing, land I've had my eye on for some time. Catherine held her breath, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. Donovan owes me for this drive and the last, Colton continued. Enough to make a start, a modest one but real. His eyes, earnest and vulnerable, met hers. I know it's sudden, I know you had plans. But I'm asking if those plans might change, if you might consider building something with me. Colton Reed, Catherine said softly, are you proposing? A smile touched his lips. Inelegantly, but yes. He paused, growing serious again. I know I'm not what your father would have chosen for you. I can't offer Boston society or fine things, but I can promise to cherish you, to build a good life alongside you. To Catherine silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her feelings into the gesture. When she pulled back, tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll build something with you, Colton Reed, something true and lasting. Joy transformed his face as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently down. You're sure? It won't be easy starting from scratch out here. I've never been more sure of anything, Catherine replied, her hands framing his face. The life I was running from was easy and empty. This life might be hard, but it will be real. Ours. They returned to camp with their future decided, a secret happiness binding them together. Tomorrow would bring the Donovan Ranch and new beginnings. Catherine would write to Nancy in Jamestown, explaining her change in plans. She would start a different life than the one she'd imagined when fleeing Boston, but one infinitely more precious for being chosen with her whole heart. As they neared their destination the following day, Catherine rode beside Colton at the head of the herd. The Donovan Ranch came into view by mid-afternoon, a sprawling establishment with substantial buildings and well-maintained fences spreading across a verdant valley. James Donovan himself rode out to meet them, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice who greeted Colton like an old friend. "Reed, right on time as always." His curious gaze shifted to Catherine. "And who might this be, Catherine Zeiss?" Colton replied, a note of pride in his voice. "My fiancée." Donovan's eyebrows shot up, but his surprise quickly gave way to hearty congratulations. "Well now, that's news indeed. Must be quite a woman to have roped Colton Reed when so many have tried." Catherine smiled, remembering the rope that had saved her from the rapids. "Actually, he roped me first." This prompted laughter from the cowboys, who exchanged knowing glances. "You'll have to tell me that story," Donovan said, leading them toward the main house. "But first, let's get you all settled. You must be trail-weary." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Colton concluded his business with Donovan, receiving payment for the cattle drive and, more importantly, securing Donovan's support for claiming the adjacent land. Catherine wrote to her friend Nancy, explaining her change in plans and inviting her to visit once they were settled. Most significantly, she wrote to her father a difficult letter that nonetheless needed to be sent. In it, she explained her new life and the happiness she'd found, not seeking his approval but offering reconciliation if he could accept her choices. A week after arriving at the Donovan Ranch, Catherine and Colton were married in a simple ceremony attended by their trail companions, the Donovan family, and neighbors from surrounding ranches. Catherine wore a blue dress Mrs. Donovan helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. As they exchanged vows beneath an ancient oak tree, Catherine thought of the journey that had brought her here, from clinging desperately to a rock in raging rapids to standing confidently beside the man who'd saved her, prepared to build a life together. "I, Colton, take you, Catherine." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love and cherish her for all their days. When Catherine spoke her own vows, the words came easily, rising from a heart full of certainty. This was no arranged match like the one she'd fled, but a union freely chosen, based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and love that had grown naturally in the wild spaces they both treasured. The celebration afterward was joyful if modest. Good food, music provided by Miguel and other ranch hands, dancing under the stars. Tom gave a surprisingly eloquent toast, his weathered face softening as he spoke of the privilege of witnessing their love story unfold on the trail. "To finding what you weren't looking for," he concluded, raising his glass, "and recognizing it when you do." Later, as Catherine and Colton shared their first dance as husband and wife, she leaned close to whisper, "Did you know? That day by the river, did you know this is where we'd end up?" Colton shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. "Never imagined it, but looking back it feels inevitable somehow, like the river was always leading us here." "I like that thought," Catherine said, echoing his words from days earlier. "That some currents, even the dangerous ones, carry us exactly where we need to go." In the following weeks, they began building their own place on the land adjacent to Donovan's. It was hard work clearing ground, constructing a modest cabin, preparing for their first winter, but they tackled it together, their shared vision sustaining them through long days and challenges. Catherine discovered strengths she hadn't known. She possessed physical endurance, practical creativity, resilience in the face of setbacks. Colton, too, revealed new facets of himself as they established their home. The reserved, sometimes solitary cowboy blossomed into a thoughtful partner who sought and valued her input on every decision. By late autumn, their cabin was weathertight. A small corral housed their horses, and plans were laid for spring planting. It was a humble beginning, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their shared dreams. On the first snow of winter, Colton returned from checking their livestock to find Catherine by the fire, a special dinner prepared and a look of quiet joy on her face. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging his coat by the door. Catherine took his hands, drawing him to sit beside her. "I have news," she said softly. "Come spring, it won't just be the two of us anymore." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're certain?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "A baby, Colton. Our baby." The joy that transformed his face was something Catherine knew she would remember, always pure, unguarded happiness that made him look younger than she'd ever seen him. "A family," he said wonderingly, his hand gently touching her still flat stomach. "Our family." That night, as they lay together in the warmth of their bed while snow fell softly outside, Catherine thought of the long, strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From Boston society to the wild rapids of a mountain river, from certain death to unexpected love, from a life planned by others to one she'd helped create. "What are you thinking?" Colton murmured, his arms around her. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied, nestling closer. "That sometimes the most dangerous moments lead to the most beautiful destinations." "Like a rock in the rapids," he said, understanding immediately. "Like a cowboy with a rope," she added, smiling against his chest. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their new home in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine and Colton Reed dreamed of spring, of new life, of the family and future they would build together, a future born from a moment of peril and courage beside a wild mountain river, where a woman had clung to a rock and a cowboy had cast his rope, neither knowing they were also casting their destinies together. As years passed, the Reed Ranch prospered through hard work and wise stewardship. Their son Thomas, born that spring, was joined by a sister, Eleanor, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, William. The children grew strong in the clean mountain air, learning to ride almost before they could walk, absorbing their parents' love for the land and respect for its ways. Catherine established a small school that served their ranch and neighboring families, fulfilling her teaching ambitions while creating an educational foundation for the growing community. Her letters from Boston eventually brought reconciliation with her father, who visited once, marveling at the life his daughter had built so far from the society ballrooms he'd envisioned for her. Colton expanded their holdings gradually, becoming known for quality livestock and fair dealing. The shy, solitary cowboy evolved into a respected rancher whose advice was sought by neighbors and newcomers alike. Yet he remained fundamentally the same man Catherine had fallen in love with, straightforward, principled, and gentle with those he loved. On their 20th anniversary, they rode together to a special place, a bend in the river, not far from where they'd first met, though far gentler than the rapids that had nearly claimed Catherine's life. There, with the water flowing peacefully beside them and the mountains rising majestically in the distance, they picnicked and reminisced about the journey that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Colton asked as they sat side by side, watching the river. "Leaving Boston?" The life you might have had. Catherine shook her head, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. Never. Not for a single moment. Even when the roof leaked that first winter, or when the well ran dry during the drought. His eyes, still strikingly blue though now crinkled at the corners, held a teasing light. Even then, she assured him, leaning to rest her head on his shoulder. Because I had you beside me, because we faced it together. Colton's arm came around her, drawing her closer. Best decision I ever made, throwing that rope. Best decision I ever made, grabbing it, Catherine countered, smiling up at him. The river flowed on beside them, a constant reminder of how life's currents could change in an instant, how danger and salvation, endings and beginnings, could arrive in the same momentous heartbeat. From desperate peril had come their greatest joy, from a chance encounter, a lifetime of love. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting golden light across the landscape, they both cherished. Catherine and Colton Reed gathered their things and mounted their horses for the ride home to the ranch they'd built, the family they'd raised, and the love that had begun with a rock, a rope, and the courage to hold on when all seemed lost.